Warren Buffett is not scared of this market. He is diagnosing it like a disease. The proof is a $400,000 bet a U.S. soldier should never have been able to win. Same-day options and prediction markets turned Wall Street into a casino, and there is exactly one system built to survive it. The first Saturday of May 2026, Omaha, Nebraska, the annual shareholders meeting of Berkshire Hathaway. For the first time in 60 years, Warren Buffett was not the man holding the microphone. What you are witnessing is not a retirement ceremony. It is 60 years of compounded discipline made transferable. Everything analyzed in this series is for educational purposes only, not personal financial advice. If your own investment philosophy has a clear foundation, articulate it in the comments. Investors in this community who do that consistently build the sharpest long-term perspective, and that is what this channel is here to cultivate.
On January 1st, 2026, Greg Abel formally became chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett, 95 years old, stepped into the chairman's seat. He still arrives at the office 5 days a week, but every final capital allocation decision now rests with Abel. Here is the verdict Buffett delivered before stepping aside. He called the modern stock market a church with a casino built onto it, his exact framing. He said people can move freely between the two, and the casino has become, in his words, incredibly attractive. The church represents traditional investing. It means buying a stake in a real business, understanding its earnings power, and letting time do the compounding. The casino
$397.4 billion in cash and cash equivalents, a record high. Scale that number. $397 billion exceeds the entire gross domestic product of South Africa. It exceeds the GDP of Norway. This is not a company hedging its bets. This is a formal, quantitative verdict on the price of available assets. That reserve represents approximately 59% of Berkshire's total liquid portfolio, all stocks and cash combined. More than half of what Berkshire could deploy at any moment sits deliberately outside the stock market. And the business generating the profits to build that reserve is not struggling. Hold this against what the income statement says. In the first quarter of 2026, operating profit rose 18% year over year to $11.35 billion. Insurance underwriting surged 28%.
GAAP net income jumped more than 120% to $10.1 billion. Every operational engine is firing at full capacity. The cash reserve is still climbing. Of the $397 billion, approximately $339 billion is held in short-term U.S. Treasury bills, government obligations maturing in under a year. About $51 billion sits in cash equivalents. $6 billion more is distributed across operating divisions. Every dollar is convertible to liquid capital within a single trading day. This is not idle savings. Treasury bills carry effectively zero credit risk. They can be liquidated at any scale within hours. What Berkshire has built.
Then a structural decision was made. By the end of 2024, the cash share had risen to 56%. By the first quarter of 2026, it reached 59%. That is not drift. That is direction. 3.5 years. That is how long Berkshire spent as a systematic net seller of equities from the fourth quarter of 2022 through the first quarter of 2026. 14 consecutive quarters of deliberate withdrawal from the public markets. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, Berkshire sold $24 billion in equities and purchased only $15.9 billion. Net outflow from stocks, $8.1 billion in 90 days. The Apple position was reduced by more than 2/3 from its peak. Bank of America was sold aggressively.
16 separate positions were liquidated entirely.
The share buyback program had been suspended for 21 consecutive months because management concluded Berkshire's own stock was trading above its intrinsic value. By the first quarter of 2026, the ratio of total U.S. stock market capitalization to nominal GDP had reached a historical extreme. With nominal GDP at $31.86 trillion, the gap between what stocks cost and what the underlying economy actually produces had become, in Buffett's framing, mathematically unjustifiable. The Shiller-Cape ratio tells the same story in a different metric. Price measured against 10 years of inflation-adjusted earnings exceeded 41 by the first quarter of 2026. The only time this ratio came close in modern history was the peak of the dot-com bubble, at approximately 44. You are watching the same structural architecture reproduce itself in real time. Meanwhile, capital continued flowing in the opposite direction.
In 2025, passive strategies, index funds and ETFs attracted $951 billion in new capital. Active management saw an outflow of $187 billion. The single largest ETF, Vanguard's S&P 500 fund, absorbed $143 billion in a single year. That is approximately 10% of every new dollar entering American ETFs. This automatic capital flow created a hidden concentration problem. The top 10 companies in the S&P 500 now account for more than 36% of the entire index weight. The technology sector alone represents approximately 30%. Buying the index means automatically directing more than a third of your capital to a small cluster of companies. You pay whatever price the market sets. There is no analysis of what you are actually getting per dollar of earnings. Buffett's structural critique lands here. Passive funds pour billions into the most expensive stocks automatically, with no regard for what those companies actually earn. Separately, intraday traders are betting on hourly price swings that have no connection to business results. Together, these two forces have broken how stocks get priced. Markets used to function like a scale, eventually balancing a business's real earnings against what you paid for it. Berkshire was built entirely on the discipline of buying when that scale tipped in your favor and waiting for it to correct. That correction is taking longer than at any point in the company's history. And yet, consider what the discipline produces while Buffett waits. Berkshire's treasury bills are yielding 4 to 5%. The reserve stands at nearly $400 billion. At that rate, the position generates between $15 and $20 billion in risk-free annual income. The patience is not passive, it is productive.
The question that connects everything that follows is this. When the casino Buffett is describing stops being a metaphor and becomes an actual federal crime scene, what does the evidence look like, and who ends up in handcuffs? Buffett's casino metaphor is no longer a metaphor. It is a courtroom transcript. Same-day options, known as 0DTE, open at sunrise and expire by sunset. Picture a carton of milk with no date printed on it, except this one spoils in 8 hours, whether you've opened it or not. Buffett has one word for it: gambling, not investing. And gambling, dressed in a stock ticker, eventually finds the player holding a marked deck. What follows is a lesson in consequence, studied here for understanding, never as a way to play the game yourself. Options were only the opening exhibit. Prediction markets push the wager further. On Polymarket, 2.3 million
You bet on what the world itself will do next. Here is the question that should unsettle you. What happens when the headline hasn't happened yet, but one man already knows how it ends? Meet Gannon Ken Van Dyke, a master sergeant in U.S. Army Special Forces.
In December 2025, while the rest of the world was reading the news, Van Dyke was helping write it. Embedded deep inside Operation Absolute Resolve, the classified mission to capture Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. He knew something the entire world did not. And knowledge like that carries a price, the moment you're willing to break the law to collect it. Polymarket bars American traders entirely, so Van Dyke hid behind a VPN to reach a market his own passport made off limits. Between December 30th and January 2nd, he funded a dormant crypto wallet and placed roughly $33,934 on a single outcome: that Maduro would lose power before January 31st.
Is that a forecast, or is it a confession? On January 3, 2026, American forces captured Maduro. The contracts Van Dyke held turned from speculation into certainty in a single moment. His profit exceeded $404,000, built entirely on an information advantage no civilian could ever legally hold. Here is what gives the case away. Van Dyke didn't simply collect the money. He laundered it through a chain of foreign crypto wallets, then deleted the email addresses tied to every trade. Innocent profit does not need to be hidden. Guilt does. On April 23, 2020,
For the first time, tools built to police Wall Street insiders were turned on a prediction market instead. The first charge? Misappropriation. He used information that belonged to his duty, not to himself. No different from a locksmith using a homeowner's key to rob the very house he was hired to protect. The second charge invoked the Eddie Murphy rule. Strip away the legal language, and the idea is simple. If your government job hands you secrets, that information is on loan, not yours to keep. And trading on it is theft from everyone who trusted you with the badge. Wire fraud and money laundering followed. The scheme used electronic networks to convert classified access into private gain. This was not an isolated case. A man named Spagnuolo, based in Switzerland, used leaked Google data, knowing in advance that the artist Fourth would top the year's search rankings, and staked $2.7 million on odds the public believed were near zero.
He walked away with $1.2 million in profit. The CFTC's enforcement director, David Miller, has now named insider trading on prediction markets a top regulatory priority. Lawmakers are drafting the Bets Off Act, aiming to ban betting on events controlled by government action itself: war, capture, terrorism. The casino can be rigged with the right secrets. So what does the church look like? The side where Buffett actually keeps his money. The church Buffett trusts has its own hero. He never touched a card table. He swung a baseball bat for the Boston Red Sox. His name was Ted Williams, and he turned hitting into a science. Across his career, Williams batted .344. In 1941 alone, he hit .406, a number no major leaguer has matched since. Inside the cells nearest the heart of the plate, his happy zone, that average climbed to 400. So he built his entire approach around one rule: swing only when the pitch lands there. In the worst cell, low and away, his average collapsed to 230. The baseball arriving at the plate was identical in both cases. What separated a legend from a bench warmer was the decision to wait. A pitcher who nudged the ball just 2 inches outside that zone gained a 37% edge. Williams' own average in that wider territory fell to 250. 2 inches. That is the entire distance between conviction and ruin. What if investing worked the same way? What if most losses were never bad luck at all, but bad?
Before Berkshire buys a single share, someone has to write, on paper, in plain words, exactly why. Not a spreadsheet dressed up to look smarter than it is, a sentence any shareholder could read and understand. If the reason can't survive that test, the cash stays parked.
This is the discipline that let $397 billion sit untouched while Wall Street's casino spun faster than ever. Patience was never the absence of action. It was a standard applied before every swing. So what happens once a pitch finally lands inside the happy zone? Greg Abel just answered that question twice. First, he found Alphabet. Berkshire bought roughly 36.4 million shares of its Class A stock at a cost between $10 and $11 billion. That single purchase tripled Berkshire's existing stake, pushing the position to $15.6 billion.
A further $10 billion arrived through a private placement, essentially buying shares directly from the company in a closed-door deal, rather than picking them up off the open market. This was no cautious toe in the water. Abel sized it to matter. But one swing alone proves nothing. Discipline only counts as a system if a second pitch arrives, just as deliberate, just as documented. It did. Berkshire agreed to acquire the homebuilder Taylor Morrison for $72.50 a share, a 24% premium over where the stock had been trading. That price valued the company's equity at $6.8 billion. Add in the debt already sitting on Taylor Morrison's books, and the full purchase, what's called enterprise value, the complete price tag including everything the company owes, reached $8.5 billion. Added
A soldier turned $33,904,000 in that same stretch of 2026 and is now facing federal charges for it. Abel turned billions into Alphabet and a home builder with a paper trail instead of a court date. The market handed both men an opportunity. Only one of them wrote his reasoning down first. Berkshire's required reserve is $30 billion, the floor it will not cross no matter how loud the casino gets. Above that floor, every dollar stays free to swing, but only when the pitch is right. After Alphabet and after Taylor Morrison, $367 billion still remains untouched, the largest pile of patience corporate America has ever assembled. None of this is a path to overnight riches, and nothing here is financial advice. It's offered for educational purposes only. The lesson is older than any ticker symbol. Losses are rarely bad luck.
And the church he built still stands exactly where he left it, waiting, not for luck, but for the next pitch worth a swing.